first thing I want to do is to amend the agenda, the revised agenda, to make the first thing on the agenda the Scott Canuck interpretation. Okay? And the other things, the Kyle Kirchhoff subdivision will be 2, and the Boucher Contour Lane subdivision will be 3. Okay? Okay, so, do you have any comments about the Scott Canuck? Yeah, you, Jim, or Megan, or Megan?
Megan, you want to go first?
You could have named Megan.
I don't have any comments.
No comments? Okay.
Jim, I'm so sorry, before you start, can I just ask everybody to speak, you need to speak into the microphone tonight, because we're actually trying out a new program, and everything needs to be spoken into the microphone.
Okay.
Thank you, sorry about that.
So you have met previously on other matters to offer opinions to the Zoning Board of Appeals on applications that are before it. And what East Point does, and Mr. Connick is the representative of East Point from the company, they're appealing Sarah Davis's February 14th interpretation under 9895B1 of the code. And when there's an appeal from a determination of the zoning administrator, the code requires that it be referred to you for an advisory opinion. And the issue, I think, can be summarized as is Ms. Davis's interpretation, the second one, correct, or is it incorrect? You have before you, and I think Megan just passed out some extra copies of the undated Tom Lowndes zoning administrator decision, Sarah Davis's February 2020 decision, and her February 14th, 2022 opinion. You also have at the foot of Ms. Davis's second opinion the text from the code of the definition of a public utility facility. And in addition, my understanding is that staff has sent to you a copy of East Point's presentation and submission on their appeal. So you'll have all that. And in addition, what you will hear and perhaps see this evening. I guess my suggestion is you consider and compare the 6 items that we just talked through as far as documents and people providing information. You'll want to consider rendering an opinion. You can do it tonight. If you were so inclined, you could adjourn it, although I think Ms. Downey will address this. The applicant has an interest in not rushing through this, but making sure that the ultimate decision by the zoning board is reached so that they don't go past an option date that they have. You don't, unlike a lot of your applications, have to refer this one to the county, so it's not been referred to them. And because it's an interpretation, you're not required to do seeker. If you think you're heading to a conclusion this evening, Megan and I, and I'm sure Ms. Downey can, and Megan Stone can help you with language. And that's what I have to say so far. Thank you.
Would the applicant's attorney like to comment?
Yes, please.
State your name.
Good evening. My name is Alexandra Downey. I'm from the law firm of Corbly, Gartland, and Rapelier, and I represent the applicant, East Point Energy. So, as Mr. Nelson stated, the question before you is whether the East Point Energy Grid Scale Battery Project is a public utility facility as defined by your town code. The project generally consists of a large battery that's going to store electricity when needed, and when it is not needed, the installation will supply and transmit the electric through the grid, similar to Central Hudson. The stored electricity will be used by a public agency and specially franchised public utilities. The installation will connect to and augment the existing Central Hudson substation, which is directly adjacent to the property. It will not generate any new electricity. It's simply acting as a battery and will store electricity from the grid to be saved for a more valuable time and then supplied. The customers served by the installation will be Central Hudson and the New York Independent System Operator, which is a not-for-profit. East Point Energy this project would not exist if it wasn't going to supply electricity to public agencies and especially franchised public utilities. So if you look at the town code and the materials in front of you, which the public utility facility is cited in Sarah Davis's letter dated October 5th, 2022, the town code defines public utility facility as an installation used by a public agency or a specially franchised public utility to supply or transmit electric, gas, water, sewage disposal, cable television, telephone service, or other utility service, excluding electric power plants and gas wells. So just taking the first step of that, it doesn't require that the installation be owned by a public agency or especially franchised public utility to supply or transmit electric, just that it be used by it. Zoning and the rest of the definition goes on, but that's really the main point here. This installation will certainly be used by public agency or specially franchised public utilities to supply electric. Zoning codes are a derogation of the common law and must be strictly construed against the municipality and in favor of the property owner in accordance with their ordinary meaning. Therefore, any ambiguities are to be resolved in favor of the applicant or the property owner. Clearly, there's ambiguities here because we received 3 different opinions. Well, we received 2 different opinions 3 separate times from the zoning administrator of this town. First 2 opinions that were, and this has been over the course of 2 years, so in 2020, there was an opinion that yes, in fact, this is a public utility facility within the town's, falling within the town's definition in their very own code. And the second one was in the beginning of the year in 2022 by the current zoning administrator that said, yes, this is a public utility facility. And then a couple months later in October 2022, we received a different opinion that this was not a public utility facility. So clearly there are some ambiguities as to the definition because we received 2 different interpretations. So going back to the town code, as I stated, the definition does not state that it needs to be owned by a public agency or specially franchised public utility. We can see that East Point Energy is not a public agency, it's not a specially franchised public utility, but what's important is that those agencies will be using this installation to supply and transmit electric. This is similar, this is really no different than how Central Hudson would work. It's merely a storage unit for excess electricity to supply to public agencies and consumers throughout the grid from when it is needed the most. And East Point Energy is, yes, it is a private for-profit entity, but again, it's an entity that will contract with these public agencies and especially franchised public utilities to supply and transmit electric. And as Mr. Nelson stated, our client is not the property owner. They are under a contract to buy. They have an option that is going to expire in mid-March. So we are looking for a decision, or we would respectfully request a decision as soon as you are able to render one, just so that our client can make a determination as to go forward with their option in March or not. Now I'm all finished, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Okay, thank you.
I just, excuse me, want to clarify that the final decision is not ours, it will be the ZBA's decision.
Correct, yes.
We will make a recommendation.
Yes.
So I would like the members of the planning board to comment on this. I know we have looked into this extensively and done a lot of reading, so I hope that we all have something that we'd like to add to this discussion. I'll start off with one thing that I wanted to point out in the letter that East Point Energy sent back as part of their reasoning for wanting the interpretation to be, to revert back to the original interpretation. They state in here that if the October 5, 2022 letter is to stand, it would send an unfortunate signal to other businesses looking to build in the community that the code can change it at any time. I just want to point out that our code is not changing, that we are simply making an interpretation of what the code is. So that just wasn't accurate. And Sarah, did you want to add anything at this point? I think it would be helpful before we discuss that about your additional training class that you attended as to why that helped you come to this new decision.
Excuse me. So just simply how this came about. East Point contacted me. I don't know if they learned there was a new zoning administrator or how that came about, but and they were looking for me to stand behind Tom Lane's interpretation. So I looked at Tom Lane's interpretation, which was in the file, and I read the information that East Point sent me, and it seemed reasonable, and I thought I had an understanding of what they were doing. So I pretty much copied Tom Lane's letter and sent it off. Okay. So then, Climate Smart sent me to a class for building inspectors and emergency response personnel, which I am not either or qualified to go to, but it was all about batteries. And since I didn't know anything about batteries, or this is all I knew, then I was really interested. So what I did garner from it was my opinion was wrong. If New York State's going to regulate this, then it's not the Public Service Commission, and it's not a utility, in my opinion, is one of them. And it's not, I thought I understood it to be like a battery where Central Hudson would store extra energy, and then when they wanted it back, they'd get it back. So it's just like an off-site storage facility. I don't really know how electricity works, so that makes sense to me. But it's really, that's not really how it's working. It's a, like you said, it's a private entity that can sell, they can sell back to the public agency, but they don't have to. They can sell to any ISO on the grid. So it's not really just Central Hudson. And as far as especially franchised public utility, I don't know what a franchise would that be. They quote they're not. That's about it. I did consult with the town attorney about changing my opinion. I felt really bad about doing that, and especially, but I learned more, and that changed my opinion. So,
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to commend you for obtaining this new information and then helping you to make a better informed interpretation of the project. So
Yeah.
thank you for doing that.
thank you.
Would someone else like to add to this?
You want to ask a question of me?
Anybody
No.
have any questions for think it's okay. Thank you.
So, my interpretation of it is that you purchase the energy at lower rates from when the grid is not as busy. You store it, and then you resell it back to Central Hudson, presumably, even though there's no contract in place for that relationship to be. So you are redistributing it, essentially. And in this, it says utility distribution facilities serving customers directly are considered customary accessory uses, not public utility facilities. So I don't know if that's a misinterpretation on my part, but it seems like the public is not benefiting. You talk about resiliency and everything, but it's still going to make electricity prices go up for the people in our town, because you'll be selling it back to Central Hudson at an increased price.
May I respond?
Sure.
So, it will be stored, yes, we'll be taking the electricity when it's not being needed and storing it, and then putting it back into the grid at a price to Central Hudson or any other public agency, or the New York State independent supplier operation when it's needed. So if there's an outage or something like that, there's certainly going to be a benefit to the public. With respect to the utility distributions facilities serving customers directly are considered customary accessory uses, not public utility facilities. We're not serving the customers directly. The customers are going to be Central Hudson. They're going to be the New York State New York Independent System Operator, which is a not-for-profit. So that's the customer base. They're not, we're not directly contracting with individual consumers. It's really, no different than how Central Hudson operates. And the key thing in this definition is that the installation will be used by a public agency to supply or transmit electricity. It will be used by Central Hudson to supply and transmit electricity once it's transferred to the grid and redistributed.
So I just want to point something out, that it is different than Central Hudson. Central Hudson sells their electricity to the public, to individuals. You won't be selling your electricity to individuals.
Our electricity, by the code's definition, the installation only needs to be used by the public agency or the specially franchised public utility to supply or transmit electricity.
Yes, but you said you are no different than Central Hudson, but you are different than Central Hudson.
Okay, but the town code definition only requires that it be used by a public agency or specially franchised utility to supply or transmit electricity.
I mean, to me, it doesn't seem like it satisfies what most people would think of as a public utility, right? So the question becomes, how do you interpret that? I guess this would be headed ultimately for a legal interpretation, right? But I think what the folks on this board are struggling with, and what you saw Sarah struggle with, is it doesn't pass what people would say as a smell test, right? To have somebody put a large battery storage facility on what's a residential piece of property, take power off the grid, just store it, and then resell it back at more favorable rates. That doesn't conjure up what most people would think of a public utility, right? Like Central Hudson or a water service where they're generating some type of utility for the benefit of the town. I'm not sure how this plays its way through, but I think that's what personally I'm struggling with, because again, it doesn't to me sound like public utility. The wording in the code, you probably have a point, right? Is it an installation? Technically, if you parse through that language, maybe it fits that definition, but it certainly doesn't feel like a public utility.
Yes, I agree with you, sir, but that's why we have the town codes, and that's why there's definitions in the town codes. And so what the interpretation is the public utility facility, whether it's a public utility facility, not by anybody else's definition, but rather by the town code's definition. And so I would respectfully submit that by the town code's definition, it certainly falls within that.
So I would answer that I can understand where you're looking at construction, just language construction and the use of the word used by. But when we look at statute construction, we also have to consider the totality of the effect of that statute, not just one word in the construction. And you have to consider what you think the intent, and we as a board are required to consider what we think was the intent of the statute. And so when we look at this, you could say the installation will be used by. You are correct that it doesn't say that it will be owned by a public utility facility, but that could also mean that it's simply a off-site facility that public utility facilities often have, and we've dealt with that before with transformer stations and facilities such as that we recognize as part of the public utility. I think when the statute requires us to recognize something as essentially part of a public utility facility, under the construction of just saying used by a public facility, public utility, or public agency, almost everything could contract with a public agency or a public, especially franchised utility, and be considered a public utility facility under this definition. The result of that for us, sitting on this board with zoning concerns, is that suddenly we would have an entire Pandora's box opened as to what type of installations could go into our residential districts. And I think that was ultimately the concern of Sarah's in the beginning as well. When she was looking at this definition, she was also considering the effect of an interpretation of the statute on the entire town. And it's not, I don't think it would have been the intention of the drafters of the current zoning code to allow private companies who are engaged in an arbitrage situation, more or less. They're not a distribution facility or anything like that. Then we start thinking, what limitations do we have on where they can go in the town, if that's the interpretation? And so I think that's what this board is struggling with, because, and tonight, to your point, Eric, we don't make the decision, we just recommend to the ZBA whether they uphold Sarah's decision or they overturn it and recognize your interpretation. But I'm uncomfortable with an interpretation that opens such a wide breadth of application in this town.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
Why wouldn't East Point get together with, say, Central Hudson
So,
and become, you know, a public utility facility or, you know, a franchise one?
so once they, once the installation or once they're in the process of implementing the installation, they certainly will have to contract with Central Hudson because they'll be tying into Central Hudson's grid. So that certainly will happen. It just hasn't happened yet. But as to your question as to why don't they partner up with Central Hudson,
Right.
I don't have I'm not sure.
That I don't understand why you would do that. I understand you're for profit, as Central Hudson is, but you're not like, basically you're not regulated.
Well, they will be, yeah, I mean, I don't have an answer. I don't know why they haven't thought of partnering up with Central Hudson. I'm not sure if Central Hudson would be interested in that. I don't know the answer to that.
Or they not to any of the specially franchised public utilities? No?
I don't know.
That's-
I'm not sure.
I just think that would be a lot easier.
Noted.
I guess they do it. Fire advisory board.
We do have comments from the fire advisory board.
One of the points while they're looking at that, obviously nobody in the town wants to create a
I'm just the attorney for the representative. I really don't know about the background. I know that there was a request for interpretation back in 2020. So certainly they've been dealing with this through the last 2 years. I don't know what impact COVID had on what work they were doing, but there is a contract of sale. There is an option, and that is expiring soon, and they can extend it for another year. But I know that there's been some research and just general planning. I think that they were maybe before the planning board when I wasn't involved already, and they had in the application there is somewhat of a depiction of what the site would look like, taking into concern any visual concerns. That's on, I don't think these are numbered, but
Yeah, I think we looked at some of these.
yeah.
things.
So I think it's just been general research.
Okay, thank you.
But have they contacted Central Hudson, basically the feasibility of this?
Yes, and one of the reasons why this specific property is attractive is because there's a substation right adjacent to the property. So they certainly have contacted Central Hudson. And so that is why they are interested in this property particularly.
And have they contacted the Iroquois pipeline?
I'm sorry?
The Iroquois pipeline, which is running into Central Hudson, on the Central Hudson property?
I wish I knew the answer. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I mean, this isn't the first time that they've done a project like this, so they certainly are familiar with all the aspects of it, but unfortunately, the project manager couldn't attend this evening.
No, I was just concerned that if these things ever did catch fire, is a 2-foot wide pipeline adjacent to the property.
I know at the last meeting with the Zoning Board of Appeals, the project manager attended, and he spoke briefly about the issues of potential fire safety and any other issues. And East Point Energy does, at their own cost, provide training to the fire department if there is ever a need to respond to anything. So they do provide that training at their sole cost.
And what about equipment?
They provide the equipment as well.
Put these wires out?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
Excuse me, thank you. So the comments by the Fire Advisory Board, basically, they are not in favor of the project. They list several points from hazardous, chemicals and whatnot, trying to access that, the size of the units, also the lack of water supply. This is Pleasant Valley. So they just are not in favor of it at all. Those are the comments from the Fire Advisory. Any other questions or comments for Ms. Downing? So board, in general, how would we like to make a decision on what we want to recommend to zoning in regard to Sarah's interpretation? Are we for Sarah's interpretation, or what is your feel?
I just, again, I don't know the forum, if this is the right opportunity to talk about the statute, but I think as Rebecca said, and what I initiated is, to me, it doesn't pass the objective, right? And if I parse through this language, I could suggest, because it specifically excludes, for example, like electric power plants. Does that mean if I got the right regulatory approval from some other agency, I could construct a nuclear power plant, which wouldn't be excluded by this, and it would be used by used by a public agency or a specifically franchised utility. So, I mean, that's where I lie, is I think that this is flawed, and I think even if you thought technically you could fit within this definition, it's certainly not the intent.
intent of the definition is not for something like this. Feels like it's for specifically public utility facilities.
So then we are for upholding Sarah's interpretation, and that's what we would recommend. Okay.
Mhm.
Great. So there's our use. Oh, I do make a motion. Okay, I make a motion that we recommend to zoning that they uphold Sarah's interpretation. Do I have a
Second.
Second, Rebecca, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, on to the second item. The Kyle Kirchhoff subdivision, 134 Gretna Road. Is that you, Richard? Yeah, that might be easier because you need the,
First of all, Kyle would like to reiterate his apologies for not being able to attend tonight. His significant other had plans that he wasn't aware of, so he wasn't able to be here. So he asked me to come. Since I live here in Pleasant Valley, it was fairly convenient for me. So the application is for the subdivision of a 54-acre piece of property into a 34-acre piece and a 20-acre piece. It's the Corda property on Gretna Road. Mr. Corda would retain the dwellings and most of the site improvements. This is the overall parcel. The home is on the south end, as well as many of the sheds and the hammocks are here. This is an indoor riding arena, and the piece that is proposed to be subdivided for Kyle is the north end. I see it as it's a non-realty minor subdivision. They did provide a lot of information in terms of, topography and whatnot from the county's fuel access site. But in essence, what it currently stands at is a 34-acre parcel and a 20-acre parcel. Most of the improvements are contained on a 20-acre. There's a small barn existing on a 34-acre piece that Kirchhoff would end up owning right now. His intent is really just to build his principal dwelling and he wants to live there. So, the area that he's proposing to build a house, although it's really not permitted to this application, is in this general vicinity.
okay. Jim and Megan, do you have comments?
Okay. This will be brief. My only question would be in large lot subdivision, tends to be, what if any future plans are there for both of the lots or particularly the one that will not get the home?
Well, as I indicated, Kyle is proposing to build his principal residence on property. I don't think he has any plans on doing anything else with it. Obviously, it's a 34-acre piece in the 5-acre zone, rural agriculture, so I can't say for certain that in the future he's not going to propose to subdivide another piece off of it, but that would be the case with any one parcel.
Megan, I think you have to speak into the microphone because of our new system. They can't hear you. So maybe we should get more microphone.
Okay, so my comments should be relatively simple. We had actually spoken earlier today, and I thought you were going to transition into proposing this as a lot line realignment.
I'm reserving that if the board has an issue with that one parcel, the building split on two parcels,
Right.
then we can revisit that soon.
Okay, so that situation, just to point it out to the board, I'm going to walk away from the mic. There is a barn, or a piece of the right.
Indoor riding arena, yeah.
Which is split between two parcels currently.
Corridor owns both of the parcels.
Right. So this didn't come up in my review letter because technically it's pre-existing non-conforming. But as the property
21 acre parcel and a 34 acre parcel. It would eliminate the non-conformity of the indoor riding arena, and everything would be on Mr. Cordes' property. One of Mr. Cordes' properties, and Mr. Cordes is amenable to that.
Okay. That sounds like a good
And
suggestion.
if that's the direction
Yeah,
the board would
that
prefer
seems
to go,
like-
then I actually have an amended application for the lot line. I can actually distribute to the board right now.
Sounds good.
So just to go through a couple more of my comments while you hand that out. Obviously, a lot line realignment has a couple less restrictions than a full subdivision, so the entirety of my letter may not be applicable, but we do need a short environmental assessment form. I don't think that there's going to be any environmental issues on the site, but just for the record, we would generally, well, if this is now a lot line realignment, it could be classified as a type 2 action unless anything comes up in the EAF. We do need a schedule of bulk and area requirements for the existing structures on the site. We need a survey of the entire property. Right now, we're only showing this area, but the entire property does need to have a survey.
The one thing I would point out, if you're under your code, that was 8225, I believe you're requesting that the scale of the plan, the survey plan, be 1 inch to 100 feet. That won't fit on a 36-24, so if we can do it at perhaps a 200 scale, that would probably be a little bit more convenient.
That's fine. Yeah.
Or 10.
It's full of applications.
Let's make it 11.
I'll take one if there's extra, yeah.
I can do this.
Okay, great. A couple of my other comments would just be that there are wetlands on this site. Off the top of my head, I believe they're all federal. So those should be, I believe they are shown on the plan, but there should be a note added to the plan that any disturbance in the future in that area or in the buffer area would require a town wetland permit.
Okay.
And that there are, obviously, since this is one large piece of agricultural property, there are traveled paths throughout both sites that would connect to each other. So those would need to be either formalized with easements or extinguished in the field, and a note on the plan that those connections would be closed.
You know, let me speak to that because most of those are horse trails.
Okay.
And in the past, we don't require those to be extinguished or easement.
Okay.
Those are, she's talking about the trails.
Yep.
Those go all through what is known as Rombout Hunt territory, and so it's different than a driveway going through someone's house or something that somebody might actually take to access between parcels. So I would propose to the board that we eliminate that requirement, because those are simply trails that people follow, and neighbors walk those trails, so, if allowed by the landowner. But I don't think there's any reason to require people to put up barriers or to extinguish those.
Okay. And I think those were the bulk of my comments.
Waiver,
Thank you very much.
explain the board,
I do,
subdivision requirements associated with the
it's full of paper.
I wish I would have collated it all beforehand.
I do have comments from the Fire Advisory Board in regard to the new lot. They wanted to know where the driveway would be, and do you have that?
The driveway is going to be in the location of the existing farm entrance.
If you were using the access, oh, there's something about a buried culvert pipe that they wanted to be sure could bear the weight of a 90,000-pound truck.
Okay, that would
It's
be
an old culvert
right in
pipe.
through here, so we'll have to look at that.
Okay, look at that.
I'll get a copy of these, I assume,
Yes.
because I'm not going to do it.
Sure, I wouldn't either. It's very difficult to do. Any driveway must be maintained year-round. Road for emergency access needs to be cleared 12 feet wide, 13.6 inches high, of any trees or structures.
So is the new proposal is just a lot line adjustment, not?
The proposal is
Now
not
it's just a
adjustment,
lot
not a
line.
subdivision, and they're not proposing, the actual house site or any of that at this point in time. So that'll come through when he submits for a building.
And then fire
But
planning.
just to confirm, the first step is that the existing parcel will be expanded to pick up the 1 acre.
Correct. That's the lot line adjustment. What we're gonna do is the line is gonna follow this. Instead of it wrapping around here, it's gonna wrap around here. It'll create that parcel and this parcel, and the 1 acre parcel will no longer exist. Or, to say it another way, the 1 acre parcel would absorb all of this property, and this would be the remaining land zone.
And the last thing was they want to see the building plans.
I'm sorry?
The last item for the fire advisory board was they requested to see the building plans.
Again, it's not part of this application right now, so it's just really to create the lots. It goes on the lot, and then he'll make his plans for the house. And he's got, obviously, got to get a building permit, so, I do have, this may actually show it a little bit more clearly. This is a plan that I got about $4 afternoon,
Thank you.
showing this is the original lot, that would be the new lot line to create the two parcels. On this one, we actually do have 12 reps. And just to make sure everybody's clear that Mr. Corda is amenable to the lot line adjustment, because he loses a lot in essence. I have a correspondence here from his attorney to him acknowledging that he's given us the go-ahead. For me? This lot is another, that's a separate owner. Right. Okay, that's not involved in the application. This lot right here is the one that has the writing, indoor writing or either straddling the property. So that lot won't exist anymore. In essence, it's going to absorb this property. And the original lot retained most of that. Just a memo from Mr. Cantor to Mr. Corda after we had a conversation about a change to the lot line adjustment.
So thank you for all of these documents. Very thorough. It's very thorough. That's very good. Very good. Does anyone have any other comments about this? No, it's just a lot line adjustment.
Yeah.
There was a request in the town engineer's letter showing existing wells.
Yes.
Those, we received those today from Mr. Corda. They're actually shown here.
I did see
That's a
that.
well, and that's a well, and there's a well over here. And then the only septic systems are in this area. I didn't have a green marker for my septic system, so I had to use the green color.
Looks good to you, okay. So, do you have a resolution prepared or no?
I don't.
Okay, so then
Huh? I didn't prepare a resolution.
oh, this is the only thing we didn't seem to get. Oh, okay. So, Jim, are you comfortable with going ahead with a conditional approval? He's going to the microphone.
I was reminded that I blew it the second time. Yep, yes, I am. My only question is that there's reference here to what looks like a separate lot of Goodison?
It's not part of the application. He's just identifying this parcel that will remain.
Okay, and that in addition to the Goodison lot, the dashed lines represent a current existing separate lot.
Correct. That
That's
will be-
basically
that's
gonna
one
be-
area owned by Corda. That'll be extinguished when the lot line is adjusted to come across through here.
Okay, and so is this, pardon me, there's a hump, if you will, where it says property lines after adjustment. That's an expansion, if you will, of a current line, is that right?
No, this is all one piece of property, and then this is one piece of property. The reason that this
Oh,
line goes
okay.
like that is because associated with the indoor riding arena are paddocks.
Okay,
So Mr. Corder would like to retain the paddocks.
Okay.
So that we ran the line around those areas.
okay. I assume that's what you were lining out to Mr. Check 10 minutes ago. Pardon me.
The little property's growing and
The little
encompassing
property is going to be 1 acre to 21
right?
acres, and then the 34 is going to be the balance of the 54 acres.
Yeah.
Makes the parcel more conforming to zoning, so.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to make a motion for conditional approval upon meeting all conditions as set forth in our letter. And I want to note that there'll be no environmental impact as it's a simple lot line adjustment. And anything else? Oh, yes. And we're waiving the public hearing.
Your approval is for lot, right?
Approval for a lot line adjustment. And I made a motion, so is there a second? And please make note, we will not require them to extinguish the trails.
I'll second that.
Second, Rebecca, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Rich,
Thank you all
you're
very
very
much.
thorough.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. So the last item is the Boucher Contour Lane subdivision.
Vacate momentarily.
My name is Tom Boucher. I'm the property owner at Contour Lane. And I apologize, we don't really have our act together yet again. I'm not dealing directly with the person who's preparing the drawing, and as the engineering firm noted on their most recent letter, the drawing has 4 problems with it: bulk area schedule, signing block for the planning board, DEC notation, and wetlands notation. So I'm not really here to deal with that. I'm assured that a new drawing will be prepared and it will be compliant. I did request 5 waivers: fire hydrants, street signs, sidewalks, lighting, and stormwater. This is a cul-de-sac off of Ring Road. There are no fire hydrants in the area. The only street signs are out where Contour branches off of Ring. There's no point in putting a street sign at the end of the cul-de-sac. There are no sidewalks, there's no lighting, and there is actually no stormwater. The intention is to put a modest house on the property, which will generate some impervious cover, but well within the guidelines, statute, regulation, whatever it is. So all I'm asking for is a waiver on those 5 items. If there are any questions?
Do you have any comments to that, Megan? Sure. Thank you.
It's CPL's opinion that all of the waivers that he's requesting would be reasonable to grant if the board so chooses. I have also prepared an EAF Part 2, 3, a negative declaration of impact, and a conditional approval resolution for the board's consideration.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions? There were some fire advisory comments. Oh, Jim, go ahead.
Megan and I were just talking.
Yes.
Do you want to set this down for public hearing for the subdivision?
Do we want to do that?
Have we waived a public hearing for a very minor subdivision like this in the past? You didn't request it. Waiver. Do you,
For lot lines, yes.
for an actual subdivision?
board shall hold a public hearing, advertised at least once. It may require further notice beyond that. What I'm looking for now is the ability to waive the hearing on the final. Okay. The Chairman Merida is correct. 9879E2 says that the discretion of the planning board, the requirement for a public hearing may be waived. So,
So we can. Okay.
We have waived in the long ago past, when there were very simple subdivisions, to save an applicant of having to do circulation and publication. And especially one where you're not intending to do anything other than a single-family house, on that 5 acres. I think that's 5 acres. on the
5 and
edge.
change, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
The Fire Advisory Board said that the entire parcel map was not shown, subdivision lot not shown.
They did submit a full subdivision plan. It's not shown on the same plan as the engineering of the septic
Oh.
system, but they did submit a full survey.
Okay. There's nothing much else there. Okay. So we also have a negative declaration for the short environmental assessment plan. And so, are there any comments, things about, or yeah, to this? No?
No, I think it's a simple subdivision, and it makes sense to support and adding your, to your request of waivers, the waiver of a public hearing in our vote. You don't get this this week.
I make a motion?
Oh,
Go ahead.
Still looking.
Okay, continue.
And where we are now is, there's no question, 9879E does allow for a waiver of the public hearing, but I'm concerned that that appears in the site plan article.
okay.
So, special use permits, special use permits.
So then I make a motion for a public hearing. Second?
Second.
Second, Bob, all in favor?
Aye.
So what is that?
So what that does is, the office will help you out, but you just have to notify by certified, use around most of the property with the larger property. So any other adjacent landowners have to be notified by certified mail, and then they will help you as well. And you have to put a notice in the paper. And then, the public hearing will be in March, here. Thank you.
Oh, if it's 62 days, then it's not.
For a public hearing, it's in process,
Oh, okay.
and so,
62 days is from the end of the code.
right,
I don't think there's going to be any problem with that.
no.
So you can't issue, you won't approve this until 62 days after the hearing?
No, we can approve at the end of the public hearing.
Okay.
So we just have to have the public hearing in accordance with Jim's assessment.
Okay. So, for the, I'd like to make a motion that Rebecca Seaman serve as chair for the March meeting, as I'll be out of town. That needs a motion? And I need a second?
I'll second that.
All right, thanks, Ed. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Short retirement.
And I want to welcome our alternate, Phil Avicino, to your first meeting. Thank you for joining us. And I think that's everything. So, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Adjourn.
Um,